right, thank you everyone for joining our webinar on the introduction to AWS. I think we called it AWS for Dummies. I know none of you are that, but this hopefully will get even the most inexperienced of us through our first experience with AWS. So what you see on the screen here is the AWS dashboard. By the way, my name is Tan Rizayam with Nogalis. We are an Infor partner, and we've done quite a few webinars on the Lawson product with Infor and some other items. We do mostly work with Lawson, and I would say about 90% of our business is Lawson-related work. I assume a lot of you are Lawson customers because you're on our mailing list, or we reached out to you through Digital Concourse. Let's see, we do quite a bit of project work. We've just gotten past dozens of 10x upgrades, working on some 11 ones, and then also do quite a bit of managed service work for a lot of our customers. So we have about 20 customers who use us for managed service, meaning we do essentially all their Lawson maintenance and support for them. There's quite a bit of range between what we do for those customers. So, and very recently, we've gotten into this AWS hosting, Lawson and AWS, either through the Infor Cloud or just using your own AWS cloud to host your Lawson application or any other of your applications, or creating disaster recovery sites, or just massive storage for your organizational needs and things like that. So had a lot of requests about having some training that was more or less kind of a deeper dive into what cloud services are. And we've been working with AWS for going on 6 years, I believe. So really, since their start, we launched a few mobile applications at that time on AWS and kind of been hooked on it since then. And so really excited to hear that Infor chose AWS as their cloud partner. So, and we've been working with lots of different customers in multiple AWS projects over the years, related and unrelated to Lawson. So we've had a lot of requests for getting a deeper dive into some of these products. And whether you are a analyst that's working with the Lawson application, or you are a systems administrator, or even if you're in a leadership position at an organization, I think I hope that this session will open your eyes into the possibility of what Amazon Web Services can bring to the table. But first, I do want to address, a lot of people will ask why Amazon Web Services when there are so many competitors. So there's the Azure cloud from Microsoft, and then there's the Google cloud product, and obviously there's AWS, and there's dozens more. So what I do want to say is AWS, as it stands today, is much larger than its next 14 competitors combined. That's all of the Microsoft Azure cloud, that's all of the Google cloud, and that's all of the next 14 competitors combined. AWS is much larger than those, and there's a good reason for it, and hopefully you'll see that reason today. It's the way they've been able to develop this on such a sound infrastructure with really amazing methodology and a very customer-focused approach. And then the other thing that I personally like about it from a user standpoint is Amazon seems to be very focused on how they can reduce your cost of using the cloud more than how they can extract more money from you. So that's been kind of a really neat experience with AWS, where I see our costs go down over time rather than up. So that's been interesting. So with that said, I'm just going to dive right in and show you a lot of this stuff. Don't worry, this will be recorded, so you can go back and review and follow along. So this would be kind of cool because you can follow along, and I'll show you how you can do that. Plus, there are tons of amazing training opportunities and materials online that you can get into. And I will post links to that on the site after after we post the video on the webinar page. So AWS in general, Amazon Web Services is what it stands for. It provides you with computing and storage capability in the cloud. That's a very simple way of putting it. So that it combines a lot of things together. So it used to be 10 years ago, if you wanted to stand up a set of servers, you'd have to order all that stuff, order or release all the hardware from, you know, HP or Dell or whoever it was, and they'd have to kind of spec it out for you. You kind of have to you'd really have to get it right before you ordered it. You'd have to do a lot of research to make sure you're not ordering all the wrong stuff. And then you'd have to also call Microsoft and get some licenses for all the products and some other vendors to get all these licenses together. You have to call your, you know, network provider for, you know, additional bandwidth perhaps, or buy additional racks and network equipment, and then also have somebody on site that knows how to put all that stuff together, and not just put it together, but put it together the right way, and stand it up. And it could take you months to get something like that done with a pretty substantial budget, because you kind of have to buy all that up front, essentially, unless you're releasing it, and even then your upfront costs were quite a bit. So AWS allows you to do that within seconds with just a couple of clicks at relatively, I would say, an incremental cost. So you only pay for what you're using as you use it, and the minute you stop using it, you don't have to pay for it anymore. So it's a incredibly cost-efficient model, and it's incredibly efficient just from a usability and launch perspective. So let's talk about what AWS can give us. Okay, so as you can see on my screen, and I will try to increase the size of the fonts here a little bit, so hopefully that's a little clearer for you. We have a compute cluster of services here. We have a storage cluster of services here. We have a database cluster of services here. And then I'm only going to review a few of these that are useful to you. So those are really the three that we're going to focus on today. Okay, we're really only going to focus on these two because the databases are kind of relatively boring. There are other items here that are super interesting, and if we have a little bit of time at the end, I do want to come back to some of them. But the most basic thing to start with is actually storage. Okay, so there is the S3 service from Amazon that stands for Scalable Storage. Actually, Simple Scalable Storage, I believe, is what it stands for. So if I click on my S3, you'll notice that I have a few buckets. A bucket is basically essentially a folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new bucket, and we'll just call it the Nogalis webinar. Actually, that has to be lowercase, Nogalis webinar bucket. So, and I have a choice of where I want to launch this. So that's kind of the cool thing. For S3, it turns out it doesn't really matter where you launch something. It automatically gets replicated everywhere around the world in all of these different regions. But the reason you do want to pick one is because that will be kind of the main place where it's being launched. So the true source of the files is there, and then it gets replicated from there to everywhere else. So this will be its quickest, fastest, I guess, replication point. So if you're based on the East Coast, Virginia is probably where you would pick. If I'm here on the West Coast, I normally would pick Oregon or Northern California. I'm actually going to go ahead and stick with Virginia because I've got a couple of things set up here that I really like. I'm using AWS in all the different regions for different purposes for different customers. So it kind of makes sense for me to do this right now. And then I'm not going to touch any of this other stuff. You can turn versioning on, and I'm not going to turn it on. There's costs associated with everything you do in AWS, and versioning can actually end up costing you some money, although it is a very useful thing. Logging, I don't need. I'm not going to tag my session right now. It's asking me how I want to grant permissions. I don't really care at the moment. So this is kind of a recap. So I'm going to go ahead and create my bucket. As you see, my bucket's already been created. Now it's called Nogalis Webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and enter my bucket. So I'm in my bucket now, and the bucket's empty, so I can actually put files in it right now. But let's go ahead and go to properties and see what we can do. So there's quite a few things you can do. You can do, like you saw before, versioning, logging, static website hosting. You can do cross-region replication. There's a new service, this is relatively new, called transfer acceleration for transferring between different regions. And you can receive notifications of events that are happening. And then this is actually a pretty cool one here that allows you to charge people for requesting content from you. So that can be pretty neat. But what we want to do today, just to kind of show you the power of AWS and how fast we can get things done, I'm going to go ahead and do this static web hosting. And I'm going to say, use this bucket to host a website. Okay, so as you can see, that's very, very simple to do. All right, so this only works for static websites. So if you're using PHP or some sort of server-written application or something like that, do not use S3. There's other things within AWS you can use, but do not use S3 for your website. This is for static websites. So what's an example of a static website? So let's say you have a content website where you're just sharing files, or you're doing some sort of promo where it's a pretty static site. There's nothing to, maybe it's just like a flyer, but you've got millions of people that are going to access it. Well, the nice thing is, remember, I said it's called simple scalable storage, right? So that simple and scalable go hand in hand in that you don't have to worry about scalability. Whether you got one user accessing this site or this bucket, or you have a billion users accessing this bucket, you as an administrator don't have to do anything. So it's essentially the I'm sorry, a little bit distracted there. I'm sorry. So it's a fully scalable solution regardless of how many users you have. So so let's go ahead and launch this, and it's asking me what I want to call these files that are kind of indexing an error and showing errors. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then I'll go to my desktop, and I've got a couple of files here. So we're just going to say hello webinar attendees. And I'm going to say, okay, there was an error. That's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and load these in. So if I go into overview and upload, and I'm going to go ahead and add these two files. And it's going to say, do you want to make these? So I'm going to go ahead and grant access to public with these because it is a website, right? So now they've been uploaded. So as you can see, that happened relatively quickly, but those were pretty small files. If I go to my properties back here, you'll notice there is a little site link. So I can copy that. So Amazon's already kind of figured out my URL for this, and it's already put it into their DNS application. So that Nogalis webinar.s3 website-us-east-1.amazonaws.com is the name on my bucket. And if I go there, I'm loading my my site, right? Now, what happens if, for example, I come back here and I remove permissions from my index file? Actually, I do that here. So I remove these permissions and I go back here. Now I get my error files because when it generates an error, it will send me to the error file. Now that sounds pretty rudimentary, but you can imagine how you can host an entire website where you have your index file. From there, you've got all your other files that you've downloaded, and you'll be able to get to it. So I hope you can appreciate how quick that was, and the fact that it's a simple and a very scalable storage solution will allow you to load basically any site that you want that's static onto AWS S3. But that's really not what's incredible about it, right? The incredible part is you can get petabytes of storage within seconds, right? I mean, that's something you could not do in today's world otherwise, right? You could not order petabytes of storage to arrive at your building that quickly. But right now I have petabytes of storage that I can tap into within seconds. If I had a few terabyte file, I could start uploading it into this bucket, and it would take it like a champ, and it would be available to me and in all regions around the world, replicated right away with disaster recovery already in mind. So it would be dozens of versions, dozens of copies of it around the world. Even if an entire continent were to somehow disappear, I would still have access to my files. Even if my original storage location were to disappear, I would still have access to my files. So it has, so I believe it has 11 nines of durability and availability. I don't quite remember which one's which. That's bad, but so 11 nines is pretty impressive. But from a availability standpoint, I believe you're talking about 4 nines. And there are different levels of this service with different costs. So you have this S3, which is kind of the very the standard version is what they call it. And then if I go back to my services, you'll notice one called Glacier. So this is just as durable, but not as easy, as quickly available. So this is really good for your really large tape backup files and things like that, but not something where you can say, I want access to that file right this minute. Glacier is where you request a file, then it will be available to you after a short period of time, maybe like an hour, and you can get that essentially available to you. There's also called reduced availability. So that's, again, like S3, it's kind of between S3 and Glacier. It's available relatively quickly, just a little less. I'm sorry, reduced accessibility, not availability. So it's for content that you're not accessing very often. I believe it's actually called infrequently accessed. So it's IA. And so that's for items where maybe you have files that are, let's say, like W-2s, right? People are only going to access those once a year or twice a year or something like that. You could store W-2s as infrequently accessed files, and that will give you a slight break on the storage fees. So they're not frequently accessed. The thing with infrequently accessed files, they're just as available and fast as S3, but you get charged more on access than you do on the actual storage itself. That's pretty neat. So you do want to make some architectural decisions as you're using S3. But you saw how quick it was for me to launch that. Now, it's just as quick for you to launch that. All you have to do is go to aws.amazon.com, sign up for a free account, and then all this stuff is available to you right away. And so Amazon, in their benevolence, have basically created a free tier of a lot of their services. So when we get to EC2, you'll see the free tier. S3 is not free, I don't think, in any capacity, but it is nearly free anyway. I mean, we're talking about pennies per gigabyte per month. Okay, so and I don't mean like 20 pennies, I mean like 1 or 2 pennies or something like that. So how do you find out what your costs are going to be? this is actually one of the easiest Google searches to make. So you basically can say something like, when we get to EC2, it's a little more interesting. So let's look at that. EC2 costs. Okay, and I don't like the calculator. I like to just kind of go into this EC2 costs page. And there's different instances, but you can kind of see, we're going to go to this pricing right here. And then it tells you the cost of each one of these things per hour. Okay, so if I were to go back and search for S3 pricing, and there's a reason I did it out of order. So it varies by region. So if I look at this Northern Virginia region, and we were using the standard storage. So it's 0.023 per gigabyte, right? For the first terabytes per month, you're only paying 2 cents per gigabyte. That is really great for something that's being replicated for you, that you have incredibly quick access to, that it's the kinds of features for access control that you could not possibly implement in-house. I won't get into access control too much today. There's plenty of stuff on the web to look at that, because I do want to get into kind of the coolest part of AWS, I think, which is compute. So that was storage. And as you can see, as you already saw, it doesn't just have storage capability. It also has some compute capability. In order for it to serve that content as web content, obviously, it has to be, it has to have some sort of compute capability within it. So anyway, let's just jump to EC2 now. EC2 stands for Elastic Cloud, and so this is the Elastic Cloud. And here we can launch essentially what you would think of as a server into the cloud. Okay, so it seems like a pretty difficult thing to do, and it should probably take some time, but let's see if we can get it done here really quickly. So I'm going to click on launch an instance, and here you'll see that I've got all kinds of options. I mean, I'm just gonna scroll through these options, right? And these are just a quick start options. Okay, there are AWS Marketplace. Okay, so there are all these applications. You may be familiar with some of these. Okay, there are literally thousands of software products that you can just launch into the cloud right from here, including, oh, did not mean to click on that. If you were to launch a Tableau server, you could do that here. And the nice thing is you don't need to buy Tableau. You don't need to buy the database service that you'd have to normally install. You don't have to buy Windows. You don't have to buy any of those things. You just click, select, and go. And there is a per hour pricing that you will pay for the usage of that Tableau server. Okay, pretty incredible. Okay, so hopefully the goal is that one day the N4 products can be available this way too. But that's obviously, Lawson's a very complex product. It'd be pretty difficult to launch it from AMI. And AMI stands for Amazon Image, by the way, Amazon Machine Image. So let's go back to Quick Start. Anyway, so I got a little distracted, but this is our first step, right? So I just want to select an AMI. I just selected a Linux box. And here's kind of cool, right? This free tier eligible, right? So it says for the first 12 months following your AWS sign up, you get up to 750 hours of micro instances each month. When your free tier usage expires, or if your usage exceeds the free tier restrictions, you pay standard pay-as-you-go service rates. So for all of you on the webinar today, if you haven't signed up for AWS, sign up for AWS the minute you have an opportunity and use your 750 free hours of this free usage tier. I mean, that's an incredible offer, right? Given that you can launch a Windows instance or a Linux instance using this tier is pretty incredible. The reason I'm doing a Linux instance, by the way, right now is because it takes a little less time to get going, just a little less time. So here I'm not really going to touch anything. I've set up my network on Amazon. You don't have to. There's one that comes with every region essentially and availability zone. There are you can ask it to do specific networking things that you're trying to get done essentially. So if you connected Amazon through a direct connection to your network, which you can do, I won't get into that either. You can do that. You can set up different roles that these are essentially security roles that allow specific people to access this or not access this. You can pick a shutdown behavior, which is either stop or terminate. Well, I'll come back to this in a second. There's termination protection, some monitoring you can enable, and all kinds of stuff like that. And this is kind of my network device that I'm connecting to. All the defaults here work fine for me. So I'm going to go ahead and add some storage. I do want to point some stuff on storage. The storage for EC2 instances is not done on S3. S3 is object storage, so that's where you can store files. EC2 uses what they call the elastic block storage, and because it's block storage, because on block storage you can install operating systems and software, whereas you can't do that on object storage. So that's the only difference. You don't really need to know any of this because it kind of walks you through a wizard-like thing, as you can see here. So I can select how big I want my first block to be. 8 gigs is more than enough for my Linux instance. I can even select the kind of storage I want. So this general purpose solid state drive is great for me. I can also do provision IOPS for faster input outputs. Or I can do a good old-fashioned magnetic drive. Obviously, I'm going to go ahead and pick my general purpose here. And so the delete on termination means that when do you want me to delete this this block storage when you kill and terminate the instance here, and I do want to check that to yes, but in some cases you might want to check that to no. And as you see here, I can't really encrypt for some reason, right? I can't encrypt my first block, and the reason is it's actually going to install Linux on this right now. There's ways to encrypt, come back and encrypt this later. But what's cool is I can add additional volumes, and I can tell it that I want even different kinds of volumes, and I have one more. 2 more options here, to cold HDD and the throughput optimized for my second drive. I can pick however big I want this to be, and this one I can encrypt now. Okay, so I don't really need that. So I'm just going to go ahead and by the way, I could have done I think up to might just let me keep going. But if you're trying to do a RAID configuration, you can just do this right here. Okay, and then once you get in, you basically have everything you need to set up your RAID configuration within just a second. Amazon, by the way, doesn't recommend RAID 5 for very good reasons. RAID 10, RAID 1, or obviously RAID 0. So I'm going to go ahead and add some keys to this. One that I like is a name. So it's the Nogalis webinar is what we'll call this one. And it's actually going to tag both my instance and my volume that way. There's a real good reason for that. You'll see in a second. Now I can pick my security groups. A security group is something very simple. It seems complicated when you hear it, but it's quite simple. I can add access rules for different ports, TCP IP ports, okay? So as you can see, it's allowed every IP address access to my SSH port because it doesn't know what my IP address is. Or I could say, hey, I want my IP address. And it would actually find out what that is and put it in. I don't want that because I actually have a rule that I like to usually use, and it's this one. It allows HTTP, it allows HTTPS, it allows RDP and SSH. So I'm going to go ahead and use that rule. These are all very easy to configure, by the way, and I'm going to go ahead and click Launch. Here's where I can select the key pair. So this is a public key encryption key pair that I would be normally using. I can create one and download it right now. And this is the only time I can ever download it. It makes sense, right? Because it's getting generated. But I'm actually just going to pick one that I created called Junk just this morning, or actually yesterday, I believe. So I have that on my hard drive already. So I don't want to create another one because I don't want to go through the work of doing that. So as you can see, I've got two terminated instances. Well, I've got a stopped and a terminated instance from the past here. And then I've got one that's pending right now, which is this Nogalis webinar. And I can click on it already and I can see a bunch of details about it. First thing, I can already see the public IP address. And for the clever hackers in the crowd, you're probably already trying to access this IP address. It'll be up in just a moment and should be up now. You saw how quickly that came up, right? That's pretty amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to try to log into it really quick. I've got this already set up, and I'm just going to change the IP address. And let's save. And I'm going to make sure that my key is in place, which it is. So if I go back, I should be able to log into this. Like a bat, I can log right into my session. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. I don't know how quickly I can increase the font size. I don't want to waste too much time on it, but I'll just tell you what I'm doing here. So first thing I want to do is I want to be the root user at the moment, because this is an older Amazon image that it loaded from. Now, by older, I mean it could be a few days old, but remember, because it's older than today, that means there could be some updates to the kernel or to the security or to whatever that we probably want to go ahead and apply. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use a utility called yum and update just about everything there is to update. And it, sure enough, found one kernel update, and it's installing it. Let's just give it a second here. Okay, so it's done with that. And so the next thing we really need, right? We need some application that could demonstrate to us this thing is as cool as I've been saying it is. So let's go ahead and install Apache HTTPS. Look how easy that is. So I'm going to say yum install HTTPD, which is Apache. And I'm going to go ahead and answer yes here. So that's it. It's installed. And now I just have to run it. So service HTTPD start. So now it's started. Okay, so now that I claimed that started, I can now go. So let's go to this URL that it has given me. Hopefully you guys believe that all of this is, there it is. So that web page is up. And if you don't believe me, we can just go to the var www.html directory real quick, and we can do an ls. There's nothing here. So we can create our own little index.html file. Oh, I have my caps lock on, that's why. All right. All right. On again, okay. All right, if you're familiar with HTML, you can make yourself a quick little page. Now I've saved it. If I go back here, look at that. So it's pretty amazing what we just accomplished, right? I mean, we stood up an entire server with an operating system that's been well proven and works. and we're able to launch it into the cloud, set up security for it that we've kind of provisioned before. This is an instance here where no one else can access it because I have the only secure key in the world right now to access it. You can access that website. You can literally go to that website right now yourself. So, or you can just go to 34.205.23.86 and get to that same page. So let's try that. Yeah. And then, so you can see all the different things about this, and there's monitoring already built in. And this is happening every 5 minutes or so. You can enable detailed monitoring. That will cost you a little bit more money. We're not going to do that right now. There's no reason for it because we're not going to be on this webinar long enough to get any great statistics. I do a status check. Okay. So that was neat. I could have done this with Windows too. It would have just taken us an extra 5 minutes because it takes time for Windows to load, but it is quite nice. You can load any sort of Windows instance you want. Ones with just the operating system, ones with SQL Server already installed, all kinds of different versions and things like that. And like I said before, you can Google EC2 pricing and then go here. And it's going to ask you, what kind of instance are you trying to launch? So what we just did was this on-demand instance. Okay, so on-demand, we launched an instance. There are these things called spot instances. These are super cool for saving lots and lots of money if you don't really care when your instance is getting launched. Okay, so if you just have, let's say you have got several petabytes of data to crunch through, and no matter what, it's just going to have to get crunched through no matter what time of day or whatever. So, but you don't want to spend, thousands of dollars on crunching through this data. So what you do is you set up these spot instances so Amazon will know that, and you place a bid. Basically, you say, I don't want to pay any more than 10 cents per hour for this instance, let's say. So the minute the price falls below 10 cents an hour, it will launch an instance for you automatically, and it will start crunching through your data based on the software that you've already installed on your image, obviously, and it will get it going and get it stored. It will then, if the price goes back above 10 cents an hour, it will automatically decommission that instance for you. It can load as many as you like and whatever. There's some other neat things about that I'm not going to get into. For you folks on the phone, since you're large enterprise and you may be thinking about moving stuff to the cloud, you're more likely looking at a dedicated host or a reserved instance, depending on the application. Very, very, very likely, if it's, let's say, Lawson, you're moving to the cloud, you'd be looking at a dedicated host so you can see the pricing for that. But let's just look at on-demand pricing real quick, because that's probably where you want to get your feet wet. And let's say go with Windows. So, and then I'm going to leave the availability region here in Virginia. It's a great region to work with. That's not saying much because they're all amazing, but it's one of the original ones. So here we go. It tells you a lot about these different versions and the cost of them, but they can get quite expensive. But so you have general purpose, right? You've got compute optimized. Those start with a C. You've got graphic optimized. Those start with a P or a G. And you've got memory optimized, where, for memory intensive applications. And you can see how much RAM these things have. They're just out of control. And then you've got storage optimized. And these are with very, very, very fast, very large storage capacity, and they can get quite expensive, like $6 an hour or $7 an hour. That's pretty expensive. But when you really think about what you're getting, this is the highest end So in this instance, right here, the GPUs, right, you're getting 488 gigabytes of RAM and 188 processing cores of GPU, and you wouldn't be able to build that yourself. That would probably be relatively difficult or impossible, if anything. And to just pay $7 an hour for it, a lot of people are using this sort of thing for Bitcoin mining at this time, because the money is actually panning out. But we wouldn't have access to those types of things if it wasn't for Amazon. Very likely for those of you on the phone, the one you're going to use is for something like a loss in hosting instance would be like an M4 2x large or an M4 4x large. A little bit overkill in my opinion, but the M4, this is a general purpose, and Lawson's a very general purpose type application, and I think that would work really well. So you're talking about 77 cents per hour, and this is for a on-demand instance. So if we were to go to a reserved instance, for example, and look at Windows, so you're saving like 25 or so percent over a 1-year term, or in a 3-year term, you would save like almost up 40% on your costs for kind of across the board. So I didn't. Some of these are less, some of these are more. So in a let's see, that M4 2x large. You would save about 20% going with a reserved instance and 30% going with a 3-year instance. And there's a convertible where you can convert to a 3-year or from a 3-year, and you still get a good savings there. I won't get too much more into the costs there. As you can see, you can Google the whole thing there. There are Amazon reps I'm sure you can talk to. What I do want to point out is, got this thing set up now and it's running. So when I'm done with it, I can just click on it and I can say, terminate my instance, and it will terminate it. Now, if I had that termination protection turned on, it wouldn't let me do that until I went and turned that off. So that's there so that you don't accidentally kill an instance that's sitting out there. And then, we talked about this being on that 8 GB volume that I had reserved. So if I go back to my volumes here, you'll notice that this has been tagged because I used that tag, and it's in use right now. But if I keep refreshing this, it will eventually delete this as well. And the reason it hasn't done it yet is because it's actually bringing that instance down. But you'll notice I've already been kicked out of my session here. So the fatal error, closed network connection, blah, blah, blah. And let's see, it's still shutting down. This is kind of really peak hour too. Okay, so now it's been terminated. And if I go to my volumes, it's now available, so it's not in use anymore. It's available because it has been detached. And if we keep refreshing this, in just a few minutes, it will go away. So you'll take my word on that. One of the other things, since we have a few minutes left here, you can set up a load balancer. And I can't tell you how easy this is. If I were to set up a load balancer in your server room, I have no idea where to start. But here I can say I want to create a load balancer, and these are the class. This application load balancer is very, very new. It's less than a year old. This idea, I really like it. In fact, that's all I use now. But you can do a classic load balancer. Basically, tell it which protocols you're trying to balance. Obviously, if you want to do HTTP and HTTPS, very likely. So I can, I got to name it something like webinar balancer. Let's call it that. All right. And so in the load balancer, it basically says response timeout. So if one of my machines is down for 5 seconds, okay, and it's checking every 30 seconds, if it's not responding for 5 seconds and it has that happen twice, right? Then it will automatically stop using that specific one. And But if it then 10 times in a row responds as healthy again, then I will put it back into the mix. So that's how you build that rule. Super easy. And now the next thing here would be to add instances. Well, I just deleted my last instance, so I don't have any to select from. But here you would essentially have two separate instances you would be selecting from. I can't go any further than this because I don't have my instances. But you can essentially create as many instances as you, or put as many instances into this load balancer as you want. And then you're done. It gives you a URL you can use for life for that load balancer, so you don't have to use the URL of your application anymore. That's pretty incredible, the fact that I can do that. And the cost of a load balancer is quite low also. So that again, kind of, hopefully if you've never seen this stuff, this is blowing your mind. Really quickly, I want to talk about RDS. So this is the relational database service versus non-relational database service, which also is super cool. So I've never launched an RDS version in Virginia. So this is where my regions are, by the way. So anywhere you are, you want to select your region up on the right-hand corner first, because your experience will be driven by where your region is selected. So now here, I can say what I want to launch. So very likely you guys are launching SQL servers, but you can also do Oracle. You can do Amazon's Aurora, which is a build on, it's basically MySQL on steroids. If you can see, it's got 5 times the throughput of MySQL and 3 times the throughput of Postgre. Up to 64 terabytes of auto-scaling SSD. That's pretty impressive for an auto-scaling, a database you probably haven't heard of. It is literally the fastest database you can probably get going. I don't know if an application like Lawson would actually support that somehow. You would have to do something custom. Never tried that, but we use Aurora and MySQL and even Maria for quite a few different applications. You can use this with your interfaces. You can use this for reporting and things like that. So even if you're not using it directly for a Lawson application, you could certainly use it for your ancillary things. So go ahead and cancel that, because you can just launch an instance of a database. It's very similar to the stuff you're used to, and then you can connect to it using your SQL management console or whatever, and that's ready to go. The other database, other than relational, there's DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database, extremely fast. So you can actually get, with the most recent accelerator they added called DAX, you can get sub-microsecond query results. That's pretty impressive. Microsecond, so it's a thousandth of a second for a query result to come back, is pretty amazing. Redshift is really used for data warehousing. And if you do a lot of data warehousing, you should really look into the Redshift. We're talking some of the world's largest companies are now using Redshift with petabytes of data, getting data back and instantly. Amazon had this famous slide that they put up in the last summit that I attended, and what would normally take 1,000 hives. So there's this query on like 10 petabytes of data that would take 1,000 hives, something like 5 years to return that query result. So Redshift, sitting on this new S3 data lake that they've created, can return that same query result in 1 minute. So 5 years to 1 minute, and at just 1 minute of usage cost to you. So really, it's if you're kind of looking at humanity and a bit disappointed with how much we've done lately as a species, knowing that S3 and EC2 and just all of these AWS infrastructure has, how incredible this stuff is, should give you some hope that we're on the right track. So one of the other things that we can do really quickly, I want to get into is with EC2, you can do what they call auto-scaling. So let's say you've got two web servers running right now, and you don't want to be caught with too few resources when all of a sudden you get a surge of users. Well, the auto-scaling feature is looking at a certain number of rules, also keeping your cost provisions in mind and all of that. And it will say, okay, well, if my traffic goes above a certain level, I'm going to go ahead and launch for you another web server. And you'll give it a set of scripts that obviously you'll need that, right? A set of scripts that tells it which applications to launch when it brings the thing up, and it'll automatically do it for you. And guess what? When that traffic dies down, it'll automatically kill it for you. So you can be scaling to the largest possible crowd of users within just minutes. And then go right back to where you were. So this is really great for when you can think about some of these startups that have like huge surges in traffic for just minutes or hours at a time, or just days. And then after that, it kind of dies down until like the next thing. So you can imagine how useful something like this can be for them. But you can also think of applications within your organization that could do this. So again, we talked about S3 for super simple storage on the cloud, and highly scalable and highly available, and EC2 for all your computing needs and more. There's a lot more I can go into, and I wish I had several more hours to get into this for you, but we are out of time. So I do want to take as much time as you guys need to answer all your questions. There's a chat box on the bottom left corner of your screen. I will stay here as long as you want to answer all your questions, but I do want to have that time available for you to answer your questions. So go ahead and start typing those in there, and I will try to get to them as we go. While the questions come in, I can show you one really exciting thing. It's called Lambda. This is a serverless computing platform. So if you've been thinking about your servers as almost like pets, where you've got names for them and you care when they go up and when they go down, those days are probably going to end eventually, and we're going to go to this container of essentially infinite, like you can think of it as an ocean of computing where you only pay for what you use. And Lambda is that. So Lambda is where you can create functions that can get computed without a server running anywhere. That is where I would probably spend some of your time if I were you in learning. There are tons of learning resources for AWS online, by the way. One of my favorites is called A Cloud Guru. I'll post a link. There are labs. AWS itself has tons of free training available. There are summits near you that are very, very informative and just incredibly good. And they're free. So if you're used to going to seminars or expos where you had to pay a lot of money to get into and you didn't feel like you got a lot of value, this is certainly not one of those. I certainly would sign up for the local summit near you. There is a big one annually every year. That one does cost quite a bit of money, but that's an incredible event to also go. It's called reInvent. But the local summits are typically free to attend. They're just educational. They're meant to get folks like yourself into this technology and kind of get you hooked. All right, I don't actually see any questions being posted. Let me refresh this just to make sure. But all right, so I think that kind of wraps it up for today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly, tan@nogalis.com. or you can go through our website and contact us that way at nogalis.com. Thanks for attending the webinar. I am going to stop recording.